Believe what you hear. Janet Yellen said that we've got until June 1st. That's 10 days away, Thursday, before the nation will go into default. Pete Sepp's with the National Taxpayers Union. He's been on CNN, MSNBC, Fox News, and everything in between, all the newspapers. Pete, you've been doing this for a long time. Your organization's well regarded as being nonpartisan, nonprofit up in Washington, D.C. Is anything going to happen before Janet Yellen says we've got 3 minutes to go before we're out of money? And how do you see these negotiations going this week, sir?
Well, I think something will happen. I've been in this town for 35 years now, seen my share of these debt brinksmanship games. Usually what happens is that Congress enacts a very temporary increase to the debt ceiling to give themselves even more time to negotiate some kind of longer-term deal. I'm thinking that's probably what will happen here, given that President Biden seems to have no appetite whatsoever for slowing down the rate of growth in federal spending, much less actually cutting federal spending. So they're probably going to do what Washington does best, which is punt for a little while, pass maybe a $500 billion increase in the debt ceiling. That's real money to you and me. In Washington, unfortunately, that will only last them a few months before they have to start borrowing even more money, and they'll run up against the ceiling again. It's really a shame when you think about it, because President Biden himself, when he was vice president of the United States, said in 2010, it's in everyone's interest politically to cooperate on the debt limit. He also said he criticized people, quote, taking an absolutist position, my way or no way, that's not governing, unquote. Well, what he's doing now is taking an absolutist position. Raise it with no conditions attached or forget about it. I think that's reckless.
Well, you're raising a very good point, and one that hasn't been talked about so far. The temporary, the short term, to buy themselves some time, maybe through the summer after school's out, people are on vacation, they're not paying attention. They don't pass it for a 12-year or 2 or 3 or 12-month or 2 or 3 year period. They just buy themselves, as you say, to kick it down the road and do something for a month or two. This would be fascinating, but a very likely possibility. I like it.
Yeah, absolutely so. And certainly nobody wants to see the United States in default. We actually had our credit rating downgraded by one of the credit rating agencies a good 12 years ago when we were very close to default. We don't want to see that happen again. We do want to see, though, a commitment going forward to practice a little more spending restraint. That was Barack Obama. He said that, well, not raising the debt ceiling is like getting a bill at a restaurant and running out on it. Well, raising the debt ceiling is like getting that same bill, handing it to the kid in the high chair at the table next to you and saying, you take care of it. Neither action is appealing, appetizing, courageous. Both of them stink. But we're in this situation. We have to figure a way out.
All right, Pete, it seems to me that the Republicans are coming up with a plan to spend less money that's somewhat tepid in my mind. I think that the House is on fire, and if Dave Ramsey were here, he would say, run, don't walk to the bank and get your bills paid, and don't overspend what you have. Are we just going back to pre-pandemic levels, and that's all the Republicans are asking?
Well, pretty much. When you take a look at what the House of Representatives passed last month, called the Limit, Save, and Grow Act, that would increase the debt ceiling, increase it by $1.5 trillion in exchange for about $4.3 trillion in deficit reduction. All that's doing is rolling back spending to 2022 levels, clawing back any unspent COVID money. There are still a couple $100 billion worth of that hanging out there. It would cap the increases in part of the federal budget, the so-called domestic discretionary part, not actually cut back, cap the rate of increase. And to your point about it being tepid, it doesn't really do a whole lot in the defense spending area. I frankly think there's a lot of waste going on at the Pentagon we ought to be looking at, and does very little to address the problems with Social Security and Medicare.
Well, you and me both about the Pentagon. I would get rid of all that woke crap immediately. But let me ask you this: it seems to me that President Biden gets the word debt and the word deficit mixed up a lot. We can cut back a little on the deficit, especially coming out of the pandemic where we spent like drunken politicians. But I don't see anything that's addressing the actual debt, the $32 trillion national debt. Do you?
No, there is no plan to actually begin paying down that debt. Only plans that would slow down additions to that debt. The national debt will continue to grow, even if House Republicans got everything they wanted from that Limit, Save, and Grow Act, that the Senate passed it and Biden signed it into law. The national debt would still go up by $1.5 trillion.
And if Joe Biden took every cent away from Elon Musk, Michael Dell, Bill Gates, Warren Buffett, and Jeff Bezos and put it toward the national debt, would it even make a chink in it?
Oh, considering that so much of the wealth that those folks have is on paper, and if somehow the federal government were to come to Elon Musk's door or any of the others and say, hand over your net worth, they couldn't possibly raise that money. And so you're correct. Maybe you could raise $1 trillion out of that. Again, a lot of money, but we're already at $32 trillion in the hole. And those folks would never, ever make another dime again. They would leave this country and take whatever wealth they had remaining with them.
All right, folks, we're visiting with National Taxpayers Union President Pete Sepp from the Capitol Hill, Washington, D.C. neighborhood. Pete, let me ask you a question before Governor Woolley gets us out of the segment here. Kevin McCarthy just said over the weekend, and I think it's a good point about the percentage of GDP that our debt takes up now. But how about the Senate? It seems to me like Chuck Schumer's going to have the heaviest lift, getting something through the Senate that the White House agrees with. You got Joe Manchin and Kristen Sinema. Nobody's talking about the Senate dynamic. Is it going to be more problematic than most think?
Oh, it definitely will be. First, you've got to get at least 60 votes in the Senate to proceed with consideration of a bill. Otherwise, it's going to be subject to filibuster. You've got a 51-49 split in the Senate right now. So we have to find 8, 9 independents and Democrats on top of the Republicans just to proceed with debating a bill. If President Biden decides to veto it, well, that's a 2/3 margin needed in both houses to overcome the veto. That would be very difficult. Whatever happens is going to have to be a deal that is already baked and ready to go. There can't be back and forth between the chambers. There's going to have to be something reached in the Senate that the House can swallow and the White House can swallow.
And the fly in the ointment, Pete, with regard to trying to use the 14th Amendment, it seems to me that it's almost negated. Even if you think a Civil War amendment would even still be applicable, it's almost negated by the fact that McCarthy got his forces together and got a bill passed. The House has raised the debt ceiling.
Yes, that's right. And this would definitely set up an interesting court case, I think, an expedited matter that the Supreme Court would have to take a look at and say, well, wait a minute. One house of Congress is already doing its job, already did its job. The Senate can get into the act. It's not our position to want to get involved with the particulars of a debt deal. It's whether the debts are being paid. And many lawmakers, the House of Representatives included, they did their job. The Senate might not like it, but they did it.
Well, it will be interesting to be continued.
To
and
be continued.
We will be following
Exactly.
this story, of course, because it does affect all of us. We'll see what they come up with. But at some point, we're going to have to go Dave Ramsey on them and start paying down some of this national debt, which nobody ever thinks about doing.
Yep.
All right, Pete Sepp,
Absolutely.
a National Taxpayers Union president, and thank you so much for being with us.
My pleasure.
Thank you, sir.
Talk 1370 is the right choice. We're streaming.